Hello everyone and welcome to this Friday edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're going to end the week right. It should be a fantastic show. We are going to finally assess one of the more interesting, controversial trades of the NBA offseason as we diagnose the Russell Westbrook trade to the Denver Nuggets in terms of fantasy. And then we're going to have some really fun IDP player profiles, a mix of a lot of different positions, especially at linebacker, a lot of different teams with a lot of different players who might have new roles. We'll have to see about them, but it should be a fantastic show. Happy Friday to you all here from New Jersey. If you went to the Mets game, that was crazy last night. I did. I had a fantastic time. But no more. We have to talk about fantasy sports. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network. It is greatly appreciated by all concerned. We do also receive a ton of tips and donations. So if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving them at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me and my fellow podcasters and ultimately the network as a whole. Also, if you have any burning questions, comments, or concerns, you can also leave them at the link, and they will be addressed and answered at the beginning of the next episode. But without further ado, let's jump in and diagnose the Russell Westbrook trade to the Denver Nuggets, because it is a very interesting one to look into. Now, Russ did want to move away. He did not feel comfortable in the atmosphere he was in, I believe. With the Clippers, I don't know Russell Westbrook's moving schedule all the time. He's a very itinerant player, if you know what I mean. But overall, a weird trade where he initially went to the Jazz so that the buyout of his contract could happen, and then he moved to Denver, where he, weirdly enough, fits a lot of different places, but maybe not the places you would expect out of someone who is known for creating his own shot and producing triple doubles to the max for many years for many different teams. And so how his profile fits the Nuggets is definitely something to keep an eye on should you try and draft the big players the Nuggets have, because Jokic, Murray, and Porter are going to be very highly impacted. Whether positively or negatively, we don't know yet. But all I know is that Russ is certainly someone who you have to overcompensate for a little bit, because he definitely creates more shots, but not necessarily for others. And I'm not necessarily certain he's going to be a boon in terms of ball movement for the Denver Nuggets, because they need someone who can facilitate the ball, work inside and outside, also work off Jokic a little bit, because Jokic, who knows, he might be the primary ball handler in certain plays because of his prowess of passing the ball and distributing it. And so this fit certainly feels like one of the weirder ones. We know that many different teams were looking for backcourt help, the Nuggets in particular, especially off of the bench, because that's where the Denver Nuggets are really known for getting the most production out of some of the guys who you might not want to start. And so I think Russ kind of fits that sixth-man role for them, should his production points-wise rise. But he certainly isn't someone who I'm looking for off the bench and off my bench in terms of fantasy basketball for the upcoming season. Let's take a look at why Russell Westbrook is going to be very controversial on this team. I talked about the Denver Nuggets ball movement. I talked about how they facilitate a lot. I talked about how Jamal Murray's very drive and kick. Michael Porter's not afraid to take a shot, but ultimately all of these guys know that distributing the ball really helps their offense tick. Ultimately, when it ends up in Jokic's hands is when it really starts to tick. But they definitely know their positions, their independence, their level of freedom in this offense. Russell Westbrook, however, last year definitely did not have his best year. Career lows of 4.5 assists in 22.5 minutes. So, as you can see, he's not offering you much in the way of A, minutes, and B, production. And if he's just going to create more shots for himself and kind of be selfish in terms of, say, the mid-range game where he's more known for production, then this kind of seamless transition to this team is not going to work. The Nuggets GM clearly said they needed more help in the backcourt. But the way I see it, when I think of Nuggets help in the backcourt, I'm thinking about a guy who's willing to play more off the ball, allow Jokic to do his thing, allow the shooters on the Nuggets to shoot, and really create this high-profile offense that can attain a level of success. The reason the Denver Nuggets offense works is because Mike Malone can get the best out of a once-in-a-lifetime big man passer, a player who's so unselfish being the secondary scorer, and a guy who, has had his ups and downs throughout his career, but when he's on his game, he's on. And how Russ views himself in that dynamic, where there's an already established quote-unquote big three, certainly will dictate how much of the ball he sees, and if he gets it in positive ways. Because at this point in his career, there's a lot of stagnation with how he plays. There's a lot of frustration too. Time and time again, you're seeing Russell Westbrook take bad shots when he has players around him who A, are much better than him, and B, create better shots than him in terms of offensive production. Now he's on a team where, yes, you can be a little bit selfish, I guess, in how you play, but ultimately there's a star, there's a hierarchy, and there's an identity there. Here's why I like Russell Westbrook, though. For many years, he was much maligned for this area of his game because of the fact that he's quote-unquote stat patter and his triple-doubles were quote-unquote offensively centered. He's a good defender now. He is a good defender. He was the fourth best defender in terms of field goal percentage allowed. That has to say something. And adding him to a Nuggets rotation that might not be focused on defense, they have some defensive liabilities, obviously. Jokic being a big one. He's not one to go back and defend in the paint that often. I think Michael Porter still needs to improve. He has good length, but he needs to use it in more positive ways. So Russ certainly adds a dimension to this Nuggets defensively where you can get more aggressive later in games, as we saw kind of in a finals win over the Heat, where they really pressed them in transition. He could add to that because I really think that the Nuggets want to improve defensively because right now they are winning with offense. The bottom line is Russ definitely, in many ways, really picks up, if he starts with the bench, the intensity, maintains that intensity defensively at the very least. But in terms of fantasy, the bottom line is you can't always be defensively minded. Yes, it's a stocks kind of driven league now. It's a big man driven league now, and it's an offensively driven league now in terms of trying to find those fits for your fantasy team. But at the end of the day, if Russell Westbrook, oh, sorry, mixing up my Russells, can't kind of combine the offense and the defensive side of the ball, if he's not on the same page with the Nuggets offensively, then I don't see many chances of success for him in terms of fantasy, and it could hinder a lot of the better Nuggets fantasy players, because the Nuggets are a very promising fantasy team. Nikola Jokic could go in some drafts first overall. I truly believe that. But when you add someone so volatile as Russ to the mix, it kind of muddies the waters for your team. Now, I think the overall profile of the Denver Nuggets heavily relies upon the depth of them. When I remember that 2023 winning team, it was mainly because of the depth and experience. Guys like Bruce Brown, guys like Jeff Green, guys like Aaron Gordon contributing off the bench. Is Russ at the point in his career where he wants to contribute off the bench consistently, knows how to contribute off the bench consistently, can fit into different looks on the court consistently? I'm not entirely sure, because he generally is more of a ball hawk. He's generally someone who wants to create his own shot, and his off-the-ball movement generally leaves something to be desired right now. He's a plus defender, which is something that the Nuggets do need. But when I think about quote-unquote help in the backcourt, as the Nuggets put it, I don't necessarily believe he's adding anything to this offense. This offense has cogs in the machine that work to the best of their abilities because they know what they want to do. And Russell Westbrook certainly is a disruptor. He's not someone who focuses a lot of attention on team play. He's starting to become a bit more selfish. When the Denver Nuggets preach selflessness. So overall, he's not the best kind of profile for the Nuggets. He certainly adds something in terms of the backcourt. But in terms of fantasy as well, this could be a solid disruption here if they really truly believe that he's an asset to this Denver Nuggets team. But I'll just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we transition to our IDP player profiles for the day, and a guy who's transitioning to a new team as well in the NFL, who's definitely going to have some questions about the power dynamic there. You definitely don't want to miss this segment. We'll be right back after the break on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys have enjoyed that segment so far. I like diagnosing these trades, especially in the NBA offseason, as they begin to affect these teams. Before we get into our second segment of the day and a very interesting IDP player profile, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me and my fellow podcasters and ultimately the network as a whole. You can also leave any questions, comments, or concerns about the show there as well, and they will be answered and addressed at the beginning of the next episode. Without further ado, let's jump right into our first IDP player profile of the day, and a player who's at a pivotal point in his career, switching teams, still in the same division after cementing himself as one of the better off-ball linebackers in the league, kind of the quarterback of that Baltimore Ravens defense. Now he's a Pittsburgh Steeler, and we're going to have to see how this power dynamic kind of plays out. Who is going to be a doozy, and it's going to be pretty fun to watch because the Steelers defense could be one of the more explosive ones in the league. I am, of course, talking about the indomitable Patrick Queen. When I think of fantastic off-ball linebackers, I think of guys who can fit into a system, understand the unselfishness of the linebacker position, and ultimately find ways to get stats for all involved, not just themselves. And Patrick Queen did that to a T last year. Truly, in a Baltimore Ravens system that found its identity under Mike Macdonald, who's now gone, so I hope and pray that the Baltimore Ravens defense stays the way that they were, because they were very dominant, and it's fun to watch dominant defense. Patrick Queen is this kind of role where he had the freedom to decide what he wanted to do. Really came into his own. Now the problem is, there was a move this offseason that saw him go to a place where, there's someone named TJ Watt, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And now we're going to have to see how Patrick Queen transfers that level of confidence he gained as one of the leaders vocally, emotionally, physically of that Baltimore Ravens defense, how he transitions it to a defense where he's no longer one of the top dogs. But overall, I feel like the transition will be smooth. So let's get into why I believe Patrick Queen is going to be a solid IDP player. Throughout his career, he's accumulated 547.5 fantasy points. 154.4 in 2022 was his career high. He had 6 QB hits, 5 pass breakups, 1 interception, 49.5% pass rush win rate. So as you can see, at every facet of the game, especially the linebacker position, Patrick Queen was a winner. Now, let's talk about this move to the Steelers. The Steelers definitely do have most of their identity centered around the linebacker core. The linebacker core is the most solid in the entire NFL. You have TJ Watt, one of the best pass rushing linebackers in the league, who can play off of the edge if you wanted to as well. Then you have Alex Highsmith, who's just a very system kind of guy. He fits in like a glove to what Pittsburgh wants out of him and what he wants out of this defense. And then you bring in Patrick Queen, someone who can transcend so many different roles, but now has to understand the Pittsburgh Steelers have a star at the linebacker position who, by hook or by crook, can play anywhere he wants. And they also have a pure identity that they've built over many, many years under Mike Tomlin. I think that the reason why the Steelers wanted him in the first place was because of his duality. His ability to plug holes in the run game, his ability to go sideline to sideline, and his ability to be a vocal leader. Because right now, the Pittsburgh Steelers are in a weird place. The offensive side of the ball is kind of in flux right now. I imagine Russell Wilson's going to be the starter, but who knows? They might platoon it if Justin Fields proves he can be solid at the position. You have a number one receiver in George Pickens. You have a solid tight end in Pat Freiermuth. But outside of that, you're asking a lot of this receiving core. So a lot of focus is going to turn to how the defensive side of the ball plays and how it plays in terms of how the offense is doing. Because the offense right now is kind of the barometer, the bar that's being set for this Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Because if the offense doesn't tick, how will that affect the defense? And so Patrick Queen kind of covers up for perhaps some of the offensive deficiencies, if that makes sense, in the Pittsburgh Steelers structure. And well, let's talk about defensively, because that's where he plays. He's not going to help offensively anytime soon. I feel like playing the inside linebacker position is so interesting. because it's not necessarily a 4-3 position where, as a middle linebacker, you really are kind of the center of attention on defense, and you really have to have your wits about you. The inside linebacker position, in a sense, does have to help more in the run, and you're not necessarily rushing the passer as much, but it also means that sideline to sideline, you have to be one of the better players on the defense. Because, especially in the AFC North, where offenses are running a lot of RPOs, especially your former offense in the Baltimore Ravens, and especially, I believe, the Browns will start running it a bit more. I feel as if you need a linebacker who can diagnose certain plays, can diagnose how and when this offense wants to set up its bigger plays. Most importantly, make sure that the running game is a non-entity. And that's what Patrick Queen does. Now here's the caveat. Do you want a guy who will probably get the most tackles in the system, or do you want a guy like TJ Watt who get you sacks, get in the backfield quickly, and just pad his stats at his own will? That's the question about the Steelers defense. Because the power dynamic right now certainly feels as if it kind of just shifted a little bit. Patrick Queen isn't someone who is a cog in the machine. He's a bona fide star in this league. He might do it in unnoticeable fashion. He's not the sexiest player at the linebacker position, but he gets the job done, and he does it well. Here's a stat that I want to leave you guys with. He's 10th among all linebackers in terms of run stop. 36% run stop. When we talk about linebackers, we talk about the position. Yes, it's getting revolutionized a little bit. But the most integral part of the job of being a linebacker is stopping the run. Because you don't want a running back to get to your secondary. You want to contain them. Especially in a very pass-heavy league. Because if you stop the run, that really takes away the variation of what a passing game brings you. And in the AFC North, that can get you a couple wins because the Pittsburgh Steelers backs are up against it in this division. They certainly don't have the offensive weapons or the offensive prowess to truly keep up with these teams, so their defense definitely needs it. Let's talk about how the Steelers match up against these offenses. The Ravens, easy to diagnose. RPOs. Lamar Jackson definitely has a dual threat ability. He's not necessarily the most comfortable passer, but still, the RPO game is one to watch because Lamar can rip off a 60, 70-yard run at any moment in time. Being one of the better run-stopping linebackers in the league might not help in this division, but it certainly can kind of slow the flow of one of the better offensive diagnose. Let's talk about the Browns. They're probably going to incorporate more play action into the system, but Deshaun Watson's also a solid runner. That's how he's been getting most of his production as a Cleveland Brown in the first place. So, another kind of system where the run game is heavily dominant. And so, I think the Steelers, when they acquire Patrick Queen, not only wanted a solid run stopper, they wanted a solid run stopper within the division. I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers, the reason why they've had so many winning seasons is because they've got just enough out of different positions to really cement themselves as a winning team, a winning identity. It's not just Mike Tomlin, it's the players that he finds and fits into this team to get him wins. And no name sticks out more. No acquisition sticks out more in the past couple of years with the Pittsburgh Steelers than Patrick Queen. This is a statement to the AFC North saying, okay, we're definitely the 4th out of 4 teams in this division, but we can steal a guy who had such a dominant season last year, bring him into our system where our linebacking core is already one of the best in the league, and he's going to immediately diagnose one of the bigger aspects of all of your games, the run game, slowing it down. And hey, at the end of the day, Patrick Queen might not be the sexiest IDP pick. At best, he's a solid tackler for you. That's the stat he's going to dominate in. But he also opens up so much more. You can get TJ Watt, and I think TJ Watt will blast into the stratosphere in terms of sacks because of what Patrick Queen brings. It's just the fact that his presence alone opens up so much more of what the linebacking core can do. Imagine what TJ Watt could do this season if Patrick Queen plugs the run and does it well. The sky's the limit for the Steelers defense, I think. It's just all about that power dynamic and establishing roles and saying that Patrick Queen can sometimes take a back seat. If so, I believe the Pittsburgh Steelers have a chance in a tough division. That will just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we have another linebacker who we don't really have to talk about too much because he's one of the best in the league, and he knows it, and he plays on the best defense in the league. We'll be right back to talk about him on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you have enjoyed that segment. I like talking about good defenses and good defensive players, and this next guy is no different. He might just be the best middle linebacker in the league, the best play diagnoser in the league, one of the best readers of opposing offenses in the league. That is Fred Warner. Sadly, he plays for a rival, but no matter, because he truly deserves the praise he's getting. When I think about the 49ers defense especially, it's all about communication. It's all about knowing your role. And even though there are names being made in that defense, Nick Bosa certainly, Fred Warner's now getting his name out there. The two safeties getting their names out there as well. There are names in this defense. It certainly seems like a very selfless place. There's no more selfless player in the league, while also being so productive in the way he does it, than Fred Warner. And I believe that playing such an aggressive style of defense on a team that expects so much out of you can really take its toll, but he's really risen above each and every single challenge he's faced. So let's talk about Fred Warner and his fantasy stats. 843.3 fantasy points accrued over his fantasy career. Last year, 159.7 points. An astonishing number. 82 solo tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 5 QB hits, 11 passes defended, and to top it all off, we talked about Patrick Queen's astonishing run-stop win rate. Fred Warner does 7 better. Third in run-stop win rate, 43% run-stop win rate. And when I actually think about those two players, these two players that I've talked about, Patrick Queen and Fred Warner, the thing I think that separates them is that Fred Warner's mental foundation is is something that cannot be taught. Supplanting himself at the middle linebacker position in a 4-3 defense where a lot is going on around him. You have Nick Bosa coming off the edge. You have so many good safeties. So many players can do so many good things. You need a solid core to hold it all together. That's what I think separates them. Patrick Queen, he had that one good season as the quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens defense. But now he's going to be on a defense where he's not necessarily trusted. Fred Warner has always been trusted, and he knows that his defense is the best in the league, and that's what makes him so much better. That's what makes every single 49er defender better. They know they're the best in the league, and they know that each and every one of them can make positive plays happen. I think that the best thing I can say about Fred Warner is that he doesn't necessarily have to worry about stats too much. He processes the game so well, the game almost comes to him. Nick Bosa can get a couple sacks. Dre Greenlaw can affect the pass rush. They can have so much presence up front. Travarius Ward, Hufango, when they're healthy, they can get a lot of interceptions. But at the end of the day, the reason why Fred Warner is so trusted in this system is because, out of all of them, he's the center of how they think mentally. I think that the 49er defenders don't necessarily realize it, but they're intrinsically linked with how Fred Warner plays. When I think about great middle linebackers, let's take one of my favorites, Bobby Wagner, for example. They're always in and around the play. Most importantly, they're communicating different details for defense. They're communicating what plays are going on. Run, pass. Most importantly, it's their actions that really spring defenses into action. Because once a middle linebacker makes a play, that really bolsters the whole defense because they know that, hey, that's a brain right there. That's a guy who's really diagnosing plays. If he's getting into the game, then we can really bolster. A good middle linebacker bolsters a defense. Because if you don't have someone who's constantly diagnosing what happens within the game, your defense is not going anywhere. Now let's talk about what, if any, potential weaknesses Fred Warner might have. The only one I can think about is that he's in the best defense in the league. And I know it's kind of cliche to say that because of me saying that that's in his favor. It works in his favor. But right now, being in the best defense in the league certainly adds a ton of pressure. And the way the 49ers are structured is that in the 4-3 system, there's a lot going on in terms of pressuring the quarterback. And there's a lot that goes on then in the linebacking core. And Fred Warner, I feel like, is most comfortable kind of sitting in the middle of that defense at first, and then when the ball is snapped, going into action. He's not someone who is going to be aggressive. He picks and chooses his moments. And sometimes, that can affect how defenses play. I'm not saying it's indecision that's kind of holding back Fred Warner. I'm more looking at how reactionary his position requires him to be. I'm looking at how the 49ers really want to preach what their linebackers do. Because the linebackers for the 49ers, I feel like, are more an extension of their coverage than, say, pure blitzers. I think that Drake Greenlaw is fantastic from the weak side as a blitzer, but at the end of the day, I think of Fred Warner as someone who can stop the run because he stays put, stays grounded, but he's also a guy who can break up the pass. And I feel like the most important aspect of his game is that he also understands that his front four on any given day can get to the quarterback. So he's someone who is attuned so well to his front four, saying, oh, if it's a long pass, I have faith in my guys up front to get it. If it's a run, then I'll be in the middle of the play. But then again, the fact that the 49ers are so dominant at containing the quarterback, it also opens up a whole new landscape for Fred Warner. 5 QB hits and 3 sacks is something to go off of here. Because if your front four is generating pressure, that's when the linebackers smell blood. That's when, it creates a lot of opportunity. I don't necessarily think of the 49ers as a linebacker blitz. Because they're so dominant in front, they know there's an opportunity. And Fred Warner, well, as a middle linebacker, and, weak side linebackers are more likely to diagnose plays where they can blitz. Fred Warner, because he's so intuitive, can realize, hey, nobody's at the quarterback yet, let me go up there and help with the blitz. So, I hope I'm not confusing you too much in terms of how Fred Warner plays, because it's a very intriguing style. But it's certainly something where the flow of the game is dictated by how Fred Warner's reactions and actions kind of define what the 49ers defense does, if that makes sense. In terms of IDP, I really think Fred Warner's success can be sustained because he's always getting one stat or another. When you look at Fred Warner's stat lines, the reason there's so much balance is because he's the best linebacker in the league. A lot of people might be kind of skeptical about that because they want maybe one dominant area, but at the end of the day, like I always say, balance wins. Drafting a Micah Parsons or TJ Watt might make a lot of sense because they get a lot of stats, but do I want one guy who's dominant in one specific stat, like I say, or do I want a guy who can get me so many different stats? And it's the same at every single level of fantasy. The same kind of thing that you have to diagnose. Do you want a guy who's dominant but in one specific area, or do you want a guy who wears so many different hats? And that's what Fred Warner does. And he's the best at doing that, no less. At the end of the day, I can sit here and tell you that maybe Fred Warner is going to have a down year. Maybe, the 49ers defense is going to be more predicated on having Fred Warner sit back a little bit more. But be wary, because no matter how stationary or reactionary Fred Warner is going to be, just know that he makes plays and he makes them consistently. And that's what good middle linebackers do. Good middle linebackers realize, hey, I don't have to be completely dominant in one specific area for the entirety of a game. I can pick and choose my spots. And sometimes that goes further than a Micah Parsons or a TJ Watt. So please consider Fred Warner in terms of IDP, because you won't regret it. That will just about do it for this segment. Coming next, speaking of solid tacklers and solid linebackers, we are talking about one of the on-the-rise talents down in Duval in Jacksonville. We'll be right back to talk about him after the break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We are in the home stretch of the show, and thus the week. Hope you guys have enjoyed all the shows this week thus far. Well, we are sticking in the realm of linebackers, and we are sticking with someone who, if you want a quote-unquote stat pattern in terms of tackles, this might be your guy. He's been killing it down there in Jacksonville in a defense that's rapidly improving, like I talked about yesterday when I talked about Josh Allen at the linebacker position. This guy certainly is someone that you have to keep your eye on, and that is Foye Oluokun. Like I said, in the Jacksonville defense, you have a 3-4 linebacker setup. You have a Josh Allen, who's a blitzer. Have a Devin Lloyd as a cover man. And you have Trayvon Walker, who's kind of a run stopper and blitzer hybrid. In there, you have one of the best pure tacklers in the league. It's very rare that when you have 4 linebackers who have specific traits, that one of them is so fantastic in terms of the tackle and playing the ball that it really opens up everyone else. I really think the sky's the limit for this Jaguars linebacking core, and the reason why is because of Foye Oluokun. Let's talk about his fantasy stats because these are impressive. 840.3 fantasy stats accrued in this season. 149.2 in 2022. 128 solo tackles last year for Oluokun. 12 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 5 passes defended. 487 tackles over the past 5 years. Now, a lot of you might be saying, well, aren't you kind of saying the balance at the linebacker position really wins you games? Here's why I think that Oluokun's game is more nuanced than just being one of the best pure tacklers in the NFL. The speed, athleticism, and power that he brings to the position really wears a lot more different hats than you think. It might not show up in the stats outside of tackles. It might not necessarily be seen by the naked eye. But it certainly doesn't mean that Oluokun can't be someone who is in and around the play in more ways than one. Solid tacklers at the linebacker position. The reason why they're so highly coveted is because, especially in 3-4 systems, people know that in 3-4 systems, each and every single linebacker is going to be special. There's always going to be that one guy who is going to have the best stats out of all of them. And I said yesterday that Josh Allen had the best stats out of any of them. But the reason why I also want to mention Oluokun is because Devin Lloyd and Trayvon Walker haven't really lived up to the potential that we know it can have. Devin Lloyd, second year in the league, out of Utah, certainly kind of feels more like a corner to me. He doesn't necessarily, feel like someone who can drop into the blitz. He's definitely someone who's rangy, and that could work in his favor in some areas of the linebacker position, but he doesn't necessarily feel much like a linebacker. So that's why I'm calling him more of someone who can help on the coverage end of things. Whereas Trayvon Walker, he's just, I'm not saying bust, but he's just not someone who I can really point out an area of his game that I would say he's dominant in. There's not really one or many attributes that I say I'm comfortable and confident saying that Trayvon Walker is comfortable in. So that leaves us with Allen and Oluokun. We all know about Josh Allen, who's going to blitz the heck out of opposing offenses. He's going to get so many sacks. He's going to pad his stats in many different ways. But at the end of the day, I really kind of see him as well as one of those guys who can help in terms of the pass rush as well, because the Jags pass rush is so desperate. And that leaves Foye Oluokun as the second best player in this position. Oluokun is kind of in a weird place, because in the grand scheme of the Jags defense, you're looking at a pass rush and secondary that's kind of trying to get up to the linebacking core's level. So that definitely leaves a lot of confusion surrounding how the linebacking core is going to play. As if you have Josh Allen helping in the pass rush more often than not, and you have perhaps Devin Lloyd transitioning to a more coverage-based role, and you have Trayvon Walker, who's not really positively affecting either aspect, then how do you view Oluokun? He views himself, I believe, as a pure tackler. He views himself as someone who can stay more centrally and stop running backs or whoever getting to the second level. But it also definitely means that he has the freedom of choice. I feel like his power definitely translates more to the side of the game where he's stopping second level rushers. But at the end of the day, I feel as if Foye Oluokun can become much more versatile than we think. This Jags defense isn't necessarily predicated on anything outside of these linebackers. They don't really have a center of attention as a pass rusher outside of Josh Allen. And the way I see it, Oluokun now has the opportunity to say, hey, I'm in a weird position right now as a Jacksonville Jaguars linebacker. I have a guy in Josh Allen who off the weak side's always going to be around the quarterback, and I have two guys who are kind of inexperienced, one in Devin Lloyd, one in Trayvon Walker. Lloyd certainly feels more like he's going to cover guys, and Walker hasn't really been good for us, so that means I need to step up and decide how I want to play it. I always think that Foye Oluokun is first and foremost a tackler. He's always going to want to be a tackler as well. But I think that there's a wide open avenue for him to really kind of interpret the linebacker role more than anyone in the league. I believe so. And he's not the best coverage man. I'm not sitting here and telling you that Foye Oluokun will immediately get 5 or 7 interceptions. He definitely doesn't feel like that kind of player. But when I think about him, I'm thinking that if the Jacksonville Jaguars truly want to be an elite defense, if they want to get back to those days in the late 2010s where they had dominant defenses that were predicated on these kind of linebackers, I really think that one of them has to become more versatile. I really think that one of them can't just be a one-trait player or a one-trick pony. And I mean, Josh Allen, as the star of this linebacking core, I could have said that he really steps up. But at the end of the day, Josh Allen can play anywhere on the front, and he would immediately be the best edge rusher for the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's weird that he's a linebacker even, because he plays so much like an edge rusher. It's crazy. So that means that in order to get the best out of your best unit, Foye Oluokun's going to have to be the guy. And it feels weird to say, and it's kind of cliche, because I'm sitting here telling you that in terms of pure tackling, he's a guy you would want. If you like tackles in IDP, he's the guy. But right now, the Jacksonville Jaguars are on the precipice of either having a foundation that works and solidifying it, or having it all fall apart around them. I think Foye Oluokun, while definitely not the best linebacker, is the building block that everyone can revolve around, because it will make it so much easier for both the pass rush and the secondary to improve if someone from the most solid unit on your defense knows that he can help in any way he can. And that's why Foye Oluokun is going to be one of the more intriguing players to follow as the season goes along. And that will just about do it for this segment. Come next to finish out the show and the week, we switch from the linebacking core to cornerbacks. We talk about one of the best corners in the game in terms of the best secondary in the game. We'll be right back to conclude today's show and the week. Hello everyone, and welcome to the last segment of the show and the week on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you guys have enjoyed the show thus far. I really did as well. But this last guy, we've talked a lot about secondary players. We talked about how vital they could be. This guy is definitely the most vital on one of the best secondaries in the league. And when I think about pure secondary players, kind of positionless secondary players, so to speak, this guy definitely comes to mind. So without further ado, let's transition to the fantasy player profile of Denzel Ward. Denzel Ward, when he came into the league, was going to be the face of the Browns secondary for years to come. And it's really wonderful to see that as the Browns are starting to build their secondary a little bit more, because they know they have a dominant pass rush. It's really fantastically fascinating to see how Denzel Ward has become kind of this leader and solid foundation of this team. And when I look at all these younger guys, Martin Emerson, Greg Newsome, Grant Delpit and Greedy Williams when they're healthy, I really think the reason that they're so solid as well is because their play is elevated and predicated on whatever Denzel Ward does. Because even though he doesn't play at the safety position as much, even though he's not necessarily, the rangiest, the fastest, his intuition can be trusted. Without further ado, let's jump right into what makes him so special. 433.2 fantasy points accrued in his career for Mr. Denzel Ward. 91.5 was his best season in 2022. Now, 11 passes defended last season, 2 interceptions, 1 tackle for loss. 17.5% ball hawk rate. Ball hawk rate being the amount of times a defender is near the ball and makes a play on it. Last season also, he only allowed 31 receptions for 290 yards. In 6 years, he has 15 interceptions, 99 pass breakups, and elected to 3 Pro Bowls. And I think that in a Browns defense that really asks a lot out of its secondary, because, the pass rush is so dominant, and they always expect that they can generate tons of pressure off the edge for this defense to generate, negative plays. The secondary definitely has a lot of freedom. And I think that having someone like Denzel Ward as your top corner really allows you to key in on the development of so many different players and attuning them to developing in so many different ways in terms of how they can play. Because I think that the Cleveland Browns are one of the top teams in terms of mixing up different schemes and different looks. You can have so much more variety when you know that your defense is so dominant. And Jim Schwartz, kudos to him as well. Kudos to him for allowing these players to really thrive in many different ways because of their freedom to choose how they interpret their positions. Now let's talk about how that might potentially be a negative. Not necessarily for Denzel Ward. I could be talking more about the secondary as a whole, how their style of play might affect them. I think when there is a lot of freedom in how your secondary plays, I definitely believe that it hinders especially a young group. When I think of guys like Pitt and Greedy Williams, these are guys who have suffered a lot of injuries, have not necessarily seen feel that much in their careers, and most importantly, are playing the most important position in defense, at least in the secondary, in terms of safety. And so, I do tend to feel that the Browns might need to consider some safe coverages, some coverages that all these players are comfortable with. And Denzel Ward might be hurt most because that's what he preaches. He preaches versatility. When you think about Denzel Ward, there's a smoother cover man in either man or zone, slot or outside, than him. That being said, I think that what's really fun about the laxness of interpretive defending is that Denzel Ward key in on helping these young guys grow. Because it's not just about stats when you're a corner. It's about being intuitive to everyone around you and making sure that communication is key. Denzel Ward, in a more lax system, has the opportunity to do that a lot more. Now, considering the fact that I'm not as worried about the Browns secondary as many different teams, I feel that if they choose the safer route, if, say, they really key in on coverages that are well-known by players on this team, I don't necessarily think that anyone's going to be going down and they'll be no less productive because of the fact that the Browns secondary knows, no matter what, they have the guys to back everyone out. But here's where Denzel Ward really comes into play. It's definitely going to be in terms of how he sets the tone with it. Because Cleveland Browns can come out and say, hey, we're going to stick with man-to-man. It's what we know. Or we'll stick with zone. It's what we know. If Denzel Ward doesn't play aggressively, and if he doesn't set the tone for continuing this narrative of going with the flow, and being a safer team on the back end and being that more connected, then that's where all the stats could be lost. That's where this defense could kind of fall apart at the seams. However, if they choose the more lax option and Denzel Ward plays aggressively, you got to make sure that these younger guys realize that they're more tertiary to the whole. And that's the kind of conundrum that, a lot of this is going to be predicated on. If Jim Schwartz says, hey guys, I think we need to kind of shore up and make sure that these young guys getting into the system really don't have to focus too much on picking and choosing how they want to play. We need to simplify this up. I really think that it's going to be detrimental to some, especially Ward, but helpful to others, whereas the laxness allows Denzel Ward to lead in a way that says, hey guys, the cornerback position doesn't have to be so cookie cutter. It can be a lot more versatile. You can be asked to wear a lot of different hats. And so, at the end of the day, I'm comfortable saying that the Browns are always going to be a team that can rely on its secondary, but how it plays is going to be the key. Because, say someone young from the secondary gets injured. Say Delpit goes down again. Who's to say that if this more simple defense gets implemented and Delpit's out for X amount of time, when he gets back, that he can immediately be integrated into that system. Delpit might want to say, hey coach, I want to choose how I want to play because I don't feel comfortable coming back into the system after injury and doing X amount of work and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, Denzel Ward is going to be the face of that. Either movement, Denzel Ward, whether positively or negatively, is going to impact how the Browns interpret their secondary. And it's also all up to the pass rush. If they're going to remain consistent, then there may not need to be as much worry or as much fretfulness in the secondary as there could be. Because the Browns' pass rush is what the defense is predicated on. It's not just the secondary who just shores it up in the back. It's the pass rush that makes sure that the secondary has an easy job. And so, if the job is easy, then you might not have to even worry about certain players fitting into the scheme. You can just go ahead and do what you do. In terms of Denzel Ward and fantasy, I really think that there's nothing to worry about because the Browns are going to be the Browns. They're going to be one of the better defenses in the league. It might have to be as well. Who knows? But Denzel Ward certainly is someone who I believe should be considered in fantasy drafts and IDP because of the way he plays the position and the way he understands the position. It's not just all about, dominance in individuality. It's all about balance, and I think he's going to find that, and the Browns secondary will be just fine. But that will just about do it for this edition of today's show. Hope you guys enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network if you so choose. Consider leaving a tip or donation at the link, gsmc.cloud. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys for tuning in again this week. Happy Friday to all. Happy weekend to all.